This uniqueness that Made in India managers have steadily made the climb, leading several global companies. Our next panel, ladies and gentlemen, is brought to you by Raymond, the Complete Man. May we have the AV, please? Where the Indian way is on edge and where culture clash pushes us behind. To tell us more about this and to moderate this panel, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome on stage editor of Outlook Business, Ms. N. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to quickly go ahead and invite our panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Former Executive Director, Tata Sons, former Vice Chairman, HUL and author, Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan. Group Vice President, Corporate Strategy and Business Development, Aditya Birla Group, Mr. D. Shivakumar.
Yes. So we have more chairs.
Joining us also is Managing Director, Pidilite, Mr. Bharat, Puri. And keep the claps coming as I invite Vice President, South Asia and Managing Director, GlaxoSmithKline Pharmaceuticals, Mr. A. Vaidheesh. And we also have Dean and Professor Marketing, SPJIMR, Mr. Ranjan Banerjee.
Thank you, panelists, for joining me here for this very beautiful discussion. It's inspired from Mr. Gopalakrishnan's book, Made in India Managers. Over the past couple of decades, Indian CEOs have really made it on the global stage, whether it is consumer, banking, academics, technology, and now from Vindi Banga, Ajay Banga, Vikram Pandit, Deepak Jain, Nitin Noria, Satya Nadella, Sundar Pichai, the list is just growing every year. And of course, it's a very heartening thing to say that there is some Indianness, to think that this Indianness in managers is really working and putting them on the global stage. But I want to ask this fundamental question to the audience. How many of you really think that this whole trend of rising CEOs is individual talent A, B, collective ingenuity or the Indianness in these people, and C, simply a reflection of the rising importance of India on the global stage? Hands up for A. Okay. For collective ingenuity of Indian managers? And the importance of India in the global pie? Okay. So does that result surprise you?
Sitting here, I couldn't quite hear your question, to which they raised their hand. So you'll have to tell me this.
Yeah, so the question was, how many of us really think that this whole rise of Indian CEOs on the global stage is to do with individual talent, second, collective ingenuity of the Indian managers, and third, simply the rising importance of India in the global pie of companies?
Now what's your question to us?
So does that result surprise you? Because most people seem to think it's a result of rising importance of India in the global pie.
Your question to me was, does it surprise you?
Yeah.
And it does not surprise me. That doesn't mean I agree with it.
Okay. Okay, let me ask the panelists. So how many of you...
as a co-author, I have a quick reaction. If I were to give the audience a fourth option...
Which is a combination of all three.
There is something unique about growing up, competing, and being brought up in India, which is a unique preparation to succeed on a global stage. Can you get a show of hands for that? That's what the book claims. Because the book's answer would be none of the above.
Sure.
So If you get a show of hands for that, that might be interesting. That there is something unique about being born, educated, brought up in India, which is a unique preparation to succeed on a larger stage. Now you look at the hands.
Okay.
So we've proven them.
So this is his way of telling you that we've got the answer, please ask the right question.
Right. I agree, I concede. So what is it about growing up in India that makes us so well prepared? I know you've also quoted in the book that this was a quote by C.K. Birla that growing up in India is a great, extraordinary lesson in management.
I'll make a few comments. We've got a book of 150 pages, so to summarize it in 3 minutes is not easy. To that question, is there something distinctive about growing up in India which prepares you for a management career and some success? You have to ask yourself, the first question is, am I going to look at this analytically or anecdotally? Am I going to look at it through mathematics, what is called mathiness, or am I going to look at it through what I have observed and experienced? And you've got people sitting around in this panel who have such experience. And we decided to do the second. We have quoted in the book what we could lay our hands on as apparently objective criteria. One of those studies says India is fantastic, they've taken over the world. Done by an HR consultancy of great repute. The other one, done by 2 management professors in Europe, says, well, it's not so clear. So it's as reliable as our GDP data. We've had a whole morning discussing from politicians about the state of the economy. It is about as reliable as our GDP data. So we sat down together and asked ourselves the question, what do we feel and touch around us? Between us, we have experience in multiple companies for a very long number of years. We went out and talked to 50 people who are acquaintances. And then we came to a conclusion, there is something happening out there. And the fact that you're not able to articulate analytically what's happening there does not mean it's not happening. Before Mohenjo-daro was discovered in 1923, our civilization was started after the British came here, or the Mughals came here. Mohenjo-daro showed you a very different picture of India. So absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, if I may quote Mr. Nicholas Taleb. And that's what triggered our book. And when we started to explore what these factors are, and I'm going to ask Ranjan to speak to this, but I will just like to summarize it in the interest of continuity. We said there are, a reductionist principle will make you look at 5 or 6 or 7 different factors. In isolation, each of those factors occurs in other parts of the world also. Poverty, competitiveness. But nowhere in the world do all those 5 or 7 happen together. And we borrowed a term from botany, which talks of emergence. Emergence is when a number of factors which are not individually distinctive combine together. It creates a transformation which is unexpected. What in Tamil, for those who speak, it is called Amenju Perku. You know, it has come out very nicely. And I would request Ranjan to speak to that, because that is essentially the thesis we have come with.
What is this confluence of factors?
The factors have been effectively delegated to me. So a couple of things. One is that when we started, we saw Pichai happening, we saw Nadella happening, and we went out and spoke to 50 to 60 of our own compatriots who were global managers. There are global managers on this stage. And normally if you speak to an NRI about India, the first associations will be corruption, there will be associations of pollution, but the common association that everybody said is growing up in India gave me some strengths, and at critical points in my career, those strengths helped me. Now, what are those strengths? I'm not going to go through all. I'll come back to emergence, I'll give you 2 or 3 very simple examples. Let's say you go to Target in the United States, and you have a bill for $22.40, or $12.40. If you go to Target and you give them $20 and say, give me change, they'll give you change. If you go to them and say, actually, I have $2.40 and I have 20 with me, so I'm going to give you 22.40. Give me 10 back. They will go crazy. There is not a department store in the US that can solve this problem. Every Kirana store in India will give you that 10 rupees back. Now, what am I saying? There is a certain propensity to deal with ambiguity and know what to do when the system does not work. That is a strength. And it is a strength particularly because the world is getting more ambiguous. The world is getting less predictable. So that adaptability, resilience, and ability to confront ambiguity. And it's in simple things. You go for a speech, the lights go off. In India, you will see people switch on the mobile phone, put the lights on, and the speech continues. Elsewhere, you will wait for maintenance. So our strength is we know what to do when the system doesn't work. We have to translate that to making the system work also a little bit more often. So that's kind of one dimension. Second dimension I'll talk about is competition. And you know, when an Indian manager goes into a corporate and they say there are 45 management trainees, only one of you is going to make CEO, he says those odds are significantly better than the odds I've overcome all my life. Getting into our top 10 management institutes is more difficult than getting into Harvard and London Business School. As head of SPJIMR, I regularly get mails from parents who say, hey, my daughter didn't get into your institute but got into LBS, there's something wrong. That's not true. It is actually more difficult. So competition, the ability to deal with ambiguity, a very strong family base. You go and ask 10 Indian leaders who your formative influences are. 7 or 8 will say family. You go and ask a group of global managers, not a very relatively smaller number will say family. So there's a whole set of factors come together, and I'm not getting into all. And again, you know, the competition is typically in an academic domain. The good managers are able to take that competitive intensity, which essentially tells you if you're bad at something, figure out why you're bad at it, work on it, and get to where you want to get. And extend competition from the academic or analytical domain to the social skills domain. And those are the people who become good. And then, you know, it's a phrase that he uses very often, which is, we have a critical mass of people who think in English. So the English language is kind of the icing on this cake. And if you look at what we're calling emergence, which is a term from botany as well as from systems theory, which is to say that if you look at the beauty of a flower, the beauty of the flower cannot be decomposed to the calyx, corolla, sepals, petals. It emerges from the arrangement of the elements and is far more than any individual element. And I'll close with one reaction. You know, in a subject called design thinking, we talk about something called an insight. An insight is a fundamental realization about human behavior that once you realize it, is retrospectively self-evident. What that means is it's obvious when you see it, but you didn't know it before that. And many people who have read the book have come back and said, you have made us look at our own experience differently. And I think that is a very, very positive.
Wonderful storyteller, that's what I can say.
So that's my piece.
Bharat.
See, when you've got the two authors here who've done a fair amount, as Gopal.
We shouldn't ideally have a panel discussion. I just realized that.
No, therefore, I think that part of the panel can do the analytics and this part can do the anecdotes.
Right.
So as somebody who's been, so as to say, an Indian manager working across 2 continents, I mean, I agree with a lot of what is said there. I think 2 things that a lot of times, in a sense, get missed but are evident. I think the first thing is, I don't know what number it is it the 1% or 0.5% or 2%? The 1% of every population is very, very smart, right? Fortunately for us, 1% of a billion is a lot of people. They also have a fairly, in the hierarchy of making it abroad is actually therefore making it, you know, one step beyond. And therefore, fundamentally, in my experience, and I worked across Asia Pacific and then the globe, the smartest guys are reaching there anyway. So they're just fundamentally very smart as a starting point. I mean, our schooling system gets a lot of criticism. Frankly, I think a lot of it is unfounded. All of us probably went through the same schooling system. Yes, we all, mugged 1 month before the exams. We reproduced what was in the textbooks. But when I look at our worldview, when I look at our ability to connect dots, when I look at our information on geographies other than, frankly, we are very, very well informed. So I really think there's raw intelligence. It's being well informed. And I just think Indians, as Ranjan put it nicely, are obstacle busters. We're used to things not working. So therefore, at any point of time when the guy says, hey, I have a problem in China, and this actually happened with me, we have a problem in China, we've made, over 10 years, 100 million pounds of losses. There are a lot of people in India and there are a lot of people in China, can you help with the problem? You realize that a lot of it is because they're looking at through, and now it sounds almost funny, but Cadbury actually introduced chocolate in China with 200-gram bars, because that is what the Australians ate. Now, my point is from an obstacle-busting stroke cultural comfort. As a young area manager, when I go to Tamil Nadu, it's like going to any other country as far as I'm concerned, right? If Vaidheesh comes to Punjab, it's the same. So I really think this adaptability, cultural comfort, raw intelligence, and very simply, the ability to get along with a variety of people makes the Indian manager a fairly smart fellow.
Vaidheesh.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with what Bharat is saying. It's not unusual to see top talent of India. They're really the top talent. So when you look at people passing out from IITs or a chartered accountant or a doctor, to be at that level, you really have to be an outstanding person to reach this stage. So when these people go to US or abroad, and then they study in the local institutions, either Stanford or Wharton. Now, what you will get out of them? You're going to get the best of the talent in the world who have figured out how to survive in a VUCA world. Actually, VUCA should have been invented in India because we live, every day wake up. As a managing director of a company in India, we wake up.
That is why it was not invented in India, because it's a way of life. When it is not a way of life, is when you invent something.
So when you go to a place, I lived in other parts of the world, I worked in the place, I can clearly see some of the muscles that you have used here so regularly, it comes to you so naturally. For other people, it doesn't come so naturally. So you would be a clean winner, particularly if you are from the top talent echelon of educated society. And, in multinational company, we have this leadership characteristics. We say, somebody should be having a cognitive agility, leadership flexibility. Somebody should be collaborative. You should be able to hold many balls in the air. If you really look at many of the stuff which we go through, all of them, anyway, everybody is doing in India on day-to-day basis. And then when you get groomed with the kind of system thinking, when you study in a big institute, you get rounded off so well. And I'm not surprised that why Indians should not be running corporations with such kind of an outstanding background. So, in my opinion, there's one more generation that this may be biased to my generation, which I'm not sure how much we are going to see that in the future. 70s and 80s, we were in a little more, what I call it, the self-sufficiency mode of the country, where we all grew up in schools and colleges where we didn't pay the kind of tuition fees that we paid, right? 250 rupees to college. In MBA, you paid 2,500 rupees. And for us, the value is about academic excellence, the way in which we all brought up, I can say for many of us is very different from the generation that's growing up in 90s or little in 2000. So I am not sure whether you're going to see more Sundar Pichai or it's going to be a different world. Right now, we are all praising ourselves for the kind of people whom we are seeing in corporate world. Many of them belong to a generation of certain values, which is very different from today. So I would reserve that till such time I see how it's going to play out.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'd say, can you hear me? Yeah. So I'd say being Indian or being American or any of those comes with its own sets of thinking, as the authors have pointed out, which is all about values, thinking, behavior, and who are the role models that you really look up to. That's obvious in any country, and I'm sure India is no different, and that would be my first starting point. My second point is, I think India has had one advantage compared to other Asian countries like China. We had higher education like IITs and IIMs much before anybody else. Okay, but that advantage is going away. We had IIMs in the 1960s, 1961. Today, of the top 3 Financial Times list of the best institutes, as ranked by them, their criteria, 2 are Chinese and 1 is Singapore Management University. We have none. So that advantage of high quality education is going now. Okay, so there are lots of people there and management education in America is actually dropping significantly. Okay, that's my second point. My third point is, I worked with a number of CEOs, global CEOs. If you look at CEOs, typically there are a lot of things. All of them work hard. They cannot but work hard, number one. Number two, they can figure out who matters where, whether it's a country or with a partner or whoever it is. Third is they're good at building relationships. And fourth is they're actually very articulate and they work on it. Okay, that's what most CEOs do. Okay, so that's what I would say. For every CEO we say from India who's made it, I can give you 25 names of guys who haven't made it. That list is a longer list than the guys who've made it. So then we have to ask ourselves, what is the common in that list that the guys didn't make it? If being Indian was the only criteria, then all 200 of them would have made it. They obviously haven't. And so my own experience of working with Americans, Finnish, Chinese, as big groups, and some Africans is as follows. Where Indian managers can improve significantly to improve their strike rate. Number one, time management. Indians are terrible at time management. Absolutely terrible. In India today, you call a CEO for a meeting, till the last minute you don't know whether he'll land up or not. Okay, so now he's a CEO in India. That's number one, which I believe is a huge source of, change. Second is power, especially listening. Most Indian senior managers, even in multinational corporations, do not listen. Okay, they've lost the power to listen when they become directors or beyond. Third one I would say is, Indian managers, when they work in India, they go out in the same company, they tend to start second guessing what the Indian company does. Okay, so they're not actually collaborative in the context of their own company and their own peers. Okay, they actually do things to actually hurt the Indian company, etc. And this is just not at the senior most levels. I have seen it from senior brand manager levels. Okay, so that's a very different mindset which I believe Indian managers can improve and do much better. And the last one I would say is Indian managers that I have seen, my experience only, have a very thin skin. They take everything personally. Okay, these are the 4, if they were to improve, I believe we'll have more Indian CEOs. These are the places where I would really ask them to focus on.
I'll just add in there. In fact, 10 years out of India, I used to actually do a initiation, not just for Indian, but actually for a lot of emerging market managers. But the abstraction was his first point. I think, as far as Indians are concerned, especially in an Asia-Pacific context, which is a much softer environment, where the feedback that you would consistently get is, but they never let us finish a sentence. And the Indian would say, but haven't they been to a GD? In a GD, who finishes the sentence? Okay. The second thing is, when there are these 3 magic words that most Indian toppers, they've come through IITs, IIMs, there are 3 magic words that they never say. I don't know. We know everything. And a lot of times, therefore, this causes its own problems. And married with this time management, in India, I will do this by 10th is an intention to try, not a commitment. In the rest of the world, it is a commitment, and therefore it causes a lot of problems. And the last point I want to raise is we're also very judgmental, and our starting point, when I meet Ranjan, I want to know what institute he's from, there is a caste hierarchy via education. We do this exactly the same when we are abroad. Oh, but do you know he's an MBA from some obscure place in the US? I can't understand how is it. I mean, and the British at the other extreme, our global marketing director in Cadbury was actually a graduate in zoology. But he was a very effective marketer. But it would take 6 months for our guys to accept that he could actually teach them something. So, I mean, I completely agree with Shiv that I've seen 3 generations of multinational managers. One was the Ajit Wadekar generation. They were just happy to be playing at Lord's. There was the second Saurav Ganguly generation. We're equals, we can fight them. There is now the Virat Kohli generation. We are much better. Why are these people even here? Right. So there's a little bit of a problem there.
So, any insights on what is it? I mean, have you looked at the other side, which is like the not so successful, because that's not a defined set, but that's like a large number of people who might have made it, but not have made it.
You know, I think what we are saying, and I think everything that has been said is true. The point is that there is a blend of strengths from your upbringing and things which a Western company does better. If you look at the best Indian managers, they have typically been made in India, but fine-tuned by Unilever or Asian Paints or PepsiCo, etc., because those companies have taught them systems, have taught them discipline, and the good guy is the guy who knows when to turn on his systems hat and when to turn on the ambiguity hat. So that ability to discriminate and to have balance. Secondly, they've talked about learnability. Learnability, humility, I completely agree. I don't know and I don't understand are the 2 most important preconditions for learning. The ability to say that. But again, it's the selection thing that, you know, the Indian managers who are able to make this adjustment are the ones you're seeing, and that number will grow. Secondly, I am less pessimistic about the millennial. I am in regular contact with the current generation, and 2 or 3 things have changed. Earlier, I still remember when I went to engineering, that year in IIT Bombay, from the college I was in, Jai Hind College, 31 people from one college got into IIT. So the top institutes were dominated by 4 metros, and if I go further, 50 schools. Today, the tier 2 and tier 3 people are coming in. They are the second generation of a family which is moving out of lower middle class. Their hunger is larger, and they have grown up seeing an Indian cricket team which is winning. They have grown up seeing a Saina Nehwal. They have grown up seeing a Mahindra and Mahindra competing on the global stage. Ultimately, we were the intellectually colonized generation. The new generation of Indian managers has a level of self-belief. It is our job to temper that self-belief with humility. Sometimes that humility and, let's say, persistence of attention span is something that we will need to work on. But, you know, there is another mistake we make. We compare our millennials with our generation. Why don't you compare our millennials with other millennials? And there you may find that the values are still stronger. I have students from 7 different countries, including Europe, coming to my institute and studying with my students. Across the board, they say the Indian students are more focused, more determined. Now, we look back and say, I recall studying more when I was giving my entrance, and that's how we judge them. So the judgment has to be generation to generation. I completely agree that this is not a panacea. We are not saying, you're made in India, you're good. We are saying that there are strengths as a consequence of being made in India. Understand and appreciate them. Secondly, I also believe the flip side, there is no other country which is so fond of beating up on itself. So be proud of some things that are Indian, they are assets, recognize those assets, don't go overboard on those assets. There is how did the Indian cricket team get to where we are? We needed Dennis Lillee. We needed Australian fitness. So the ability to learn from the world selectively, and the ability to preserve and be proud of that which is Indian, which is a strength in certain situations, this is meant to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, not a happy radar prediction. Sure. Right?
Shiv, I want to pose this question to you. He talked about, you are molded by the companies that you initially work for, and then you need to know when, if you're with Asian Paints or any other company. If you go and start working with a Western company, you need to know when you need to wear that hat and when you need to wear the ambiguity hat. You've worked with European companies, you've worked with PepsiCo, American company, now with an Indian company. Is that really possible?
Yes, it
Because,
is.
I mean, changing, I mean, something you have, I mean, if you spend 10 years in a certain culture, you're used to doing in a certain way, it must be really hard, I presume, to sort of suddenly say that here is a culture that is different, I need to mold myself to that.
Yeah, so at the core of it, most businesses follow, some simple principles of, what they want to achieve, why they want to achieve, etc. There's no, every business is like that. But, companies which come from different countries have very different values in terms of what they signal. An American company is about being individual, get it done, okay? You need to get it done, it's your call. An American company and people who work for American companies clearly know that they can be fired if something goes wrong, they can be separated. Okay, that's the nature, everybody understands that. Okay, now, those are not written anywhere, but those are understood by everybody. Now you shift to a Finnish company. For Finnish company, the company comes first. If you do anything to hurt the company, you're gone. Full stop. Okay, so now that's deep-rooted because Finns have a huge amount of teamwork and they can retire at 55 with 65% of last round salary. Okay, that benefit is there. So they're not a hire and fire gang. So to them, work for the company first, the team second, the individual third. If you reverse the order or do something wrong, in the next reorganization, which is 18 to 24 months, you won't have a job. Okay, they mark that very, very clearly. So you adjust to that again to say, hey, this is the order very clearly. Okay, so every country has some nuances which impact on that company of that country. There's no doubt about it. Okay, and values, by and large, most companies have similar values. Tell me which company says we are not integrity. Everybody says we are integrity. Which company says we don't want speed? Which company says we don't want boundarylessness? Which company says we don't have respect for the individual? So much so, I would say today that values are commodity. You just mix and match and everybody is there.
Does play a huge role in terms of what you encourage and what you discourage. For example, I mean, how much risk can you really take? How much entrepreneurial can you really be? I mean, these can really make huge difference in terms of how the organization ethos is and how you're expected to behave in a certain situation. So while companies may say we want speed, targets, goal, whatever, how you go about it can be vastly different.
Yeah, so you're right. So collectively, the company over its context and history has some lessons which it has learned, hands burnt, successes, etc. Nokia evolved over 150 years from gum boots to paper to everything. So they took the big bet of mobile phones in the 90s, which nobody else did. Okay, but equally the same company lost by choosing Windows as opposed to Android. Okay, after 25 years of success. Okay, so it is finally the ethos of that company as defined by, I would think many a time when you're talking of this kind of transformation, senior leadership and what matters to them.
Vaidheesh, any anecdotes that you can recall working with your global peers, superiors, teams, and what were your takeaways?
Anecdote related to Indianness, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Or, yeah. See, as many of them said, so at the end of the day, most of the Indians working in, I would say, in a multinational environment, I think tend to think we're really smart. Whether you like it or not, whether they are smart or not, but generally the going in belief is that I'm smarter than someone. For some strange reason, we tend to compete. I don't even know why you need to compete in a place where you don't need to compete. So I had an, interesting, there's a program that's going on. It's a management development program, and people have to do a lot of pre-work and be there. And it was in US, in New Jersey. And I had sent some people to attend the program, and I was auditing that program as one of the few audit. So the person who was conducting this program was, while doing the program, asking a lot of questions. And every time, Indian used to raise the hand, the people who went there. And at some point of time, it was a Gutman training, on. So finally, he got so vexed with this Indian participation. He says, I'm not sure whether you should be in this room. You guys know so much. Why are you guys coming for this program? And it was so embarrassing. But the fact of the matter is that is something which is very interesting. I'm not sure whether right or wrong. But you wonder as to why do you come here to learn, when you talk about learn, but they're as if you're going there for an exam. For everything is all about exams, scoring marks and being number one. I think by way of upbringing in our education system has brought so much into our work. So I think that's where one of the areas, if at all, somebody could soften as you move up in the ladder in an organization, listening that you talked about, and learning as one of the important. So I can give multiple examples of that, but it's at the end of the day, I would also like to believe that they are smart. I don't think that they're not smart. It's just that this roughness, if it can be molded, I think we can go much, longer distance.
Is that a positive, or does it put you behind Gopal, which is like, this whole, the fact that you are smart and you think smart, you want to be seen as smart, so.
I wouldn't like to classify it as positive or negative because it depends on that circumstance.
What I mean is, does it work for you? Does it work against you? Because
Bharat
saying that we don't know the 3 magic words that I don't know, we never use.
Yeah, so when you're in a situation where it is better to say I don't know and you don't use those 3 words, it works to your disadvantage. My interpretation, because I agree with the phenomenon, is we speak like we drive our cars on the road. Forget the rules and just say Sholpa adjust Madi and move your car in whichever way you want. That's not the way the Brits drive their cars. And therefore, I didn't even get a driving license after driving in India for 30 years. I failed my British driving test, rightly so. And when I came back with my British driving license, I said people like me should follow the rules. I tried to drive in Bombay with the British type of discipline, and everybody honked his car at me. He said, "Get out of the way, you madman. Why are you waiting at the pedestrian crossing?" The same thing happens to us when we deal with these I don't know situations. I think it's very important, and I would like to take a minute or two to re-emphasize. The thesis of our book is not that Indian startups are great, everything else is great, Indian cricket is great, India has now reached the big league. No, it's not. I want to emphasize that. It is an idea. It's like a piece of a little pearl set in a little gold jewelry. It's an idea which we've set in a context. And only those who read the book, who have the same experience of working in international situations, can relate with the book. And some will agree and we understand, some will disagree. That's fine. So what is this jewelry, this gold jewelry in which this pearl is set? It is that India has always exported ideas. A country like China has always exported things. So 22/7, 0, these are the intellectual things that came from India. I'm not saying Chinese are dumb, don't get me wrong, but they made compass and gunpowder and that sort of stuff. So this is in continuation with a tradition that India has always been good at. So there's a natural propensity, that's a factor. The second is, these things take 50 years before they manifest themselves. People don't realize, today Americans think yoga is an American art, American science, but actually it went out in 1920. But it took 50 years before yoga became popular, and today it's the rage, and many Americans think it's really American. So it will take, we have now had 50 years of Indian management, because the first management school in this country came in 1949. India produces more management diplomas per year than Britain produces in 25 years. Now you may say Britain is a small country.
That is not really management diploma. The quality is really suspect.
Well, I said they produce people with a management diploma. I didn't say the quality is comparable. But out of that 120,000 you produce, maybe 3,000-4,000 are pretty good. And that's all that Britain produces. Now, I'm not saying Britain should produce more. I'm merely stating that a culture of studying management, being management as a profession, has been long-standing compared to, say, China or anywhere else. And I think it's very important to not take the future for granted in the ways that were described, and I'm sure there are other ways. And what we sought to do by writing this book and publishing it is to see what can management pedagogy do for the future. And what is it that we as a community of professionals, managers, need to do well abroad? Not be number one, number two, that's not the question. And what gives you the propensity to succeed is the following. Management is about identifying an opportunity and overcoming the obstacles amidst uncertainty through people. Anybody can define management whichever way he wants, that's a manager. India has opportunity. We have the largest number of obstacles compared to anywhere else. Don't believe the ministers who spoke this morning. We have the largest number of obstacles, continue to have. They are trying to do their bit, that's fine. The largest number of obstacles. And you're working through uncertainty all the time. And so other countries are saying what will we do in the VUCA world. We have never experienced what is not a VUCA world. For all our lives we've had a VUCA world. So when we go there, abroad, where there are systems and processes and rules following, and we learn those, we find a lot of our energy is saved. When I was abroad, I could finish in 7-8 hours what would take me 14 hours here. That's not because I became smarter, drinking the water of that country, but because things worked. Here I'm talking of the 70s and the 80s, a lot of things didn't work, so you had to sit down and work on it. I think if you can put this into the right context and say, is there a great future for Indian management? We are talking of make in India. You can make armaments in India, you can make agriculture in India. Government never thought of making managers in India. Managers made themselves with or without the government help. And like the software industry, which without the government knowing what's happening become.
They helped in perpetuating the uncertainty. You can't say that.
Well, yes, so they can continue to do that, but I think Indian managers have a lot going for them if they nurture this little flickering flame extremely well.
And just build on this, there was this, Vaidheesh, I think, had this story of people going to a workshop and asking a lot of questions. I think there are 2 points there. One point is that competitiveness. But the second point, I think, is that comes out of insecurity. You go to a forum where there are a lot of people from an international stage, and I think the first thought which comes from your colonial hangover is, do I really belong? And it is this fear of not belonging that comes from the colonial hangover. So ultimately, we will have to be able to have this balance between where there is scarcity and where there is abundance, where there is lack of rule of law and rule of law. And I will give you 2 examples on the negative side. So there is this thing called diplomatic immunity. That if in the US, if you get a parking ticket, okay, you can claim diplomatic immunity and you do not have to pay for your parking ticket. Now, one smart academic researcher went and said, okay, which countries' diplomats are citing immunity? So you can guess the countries. India, Pakistan, and Italy, right on top. So the respect for the rule of law and the ability to understand that is something that we have to appreciate. Why does the queue at Singapore airport change so much by the time it reaches Bombay? And that is an inherent kind of a thing. The second dimension is self-belief, because I think for too long, the same idea coming out of Harvard and coming out of India has been evaluated differently. And I will cite a very simple example. I took over in a premier business school, and somebody from a very reputed school, a number 2 position, was staying in a 5-star hotel and was supposed to come to our institute to visit. And at 6 o'clock, I get a call saying this person's schedule is busy. Can your dean come and visit in the hotel? And I was new in the job and I thought about it. And then I said, look, if I had gone and done that in the US, it would not have worked. So I simply said very respectfully, I told my people, say that, we appreciate his busyness. We will wait till the next trip. The next day, the person came to the institute. And my point is, somewhere down the line, one of the larger issues is we have to be humble, but we have to have a deeper self-belief. We still place a higher value on the same idea coming out of India. And that deeper insecurity, I believe, is the reason why some of these people are trying too hard to prove themselves. So
that's something you agree? We have a deep sense of insecurity?
I think it is a deep sense of insecurity, I would actually color it a bit and say it is a deep sense of wanting to prove oneself. At every single occasion, it is about, what he talked about belonging and I deserve to be here. It is, he was talking about this workshop. I was organizing a Asia Pacific workshop in Mumbai. And the CEOs of each country had to attend in a different country. So our Japanese CEO, who was a very sweet Japanese lady, I asked her to attend the India workshop. And on the second morning, I was to have breakfast with her, and she's like waiting at the door. Bharat-san, can you please come? I said, what's happened? Bharat-san, you please come and join my group. I said, Inui-san, what has happened? He said, there are these two Indian boys. They are going to kill each other. I said, Inui-san, don't worry. This is just the Indian way of arguing, and they're both trying to prove to their boss that they know more than each other. No, Bharat-san, please. And she was genuinely agitated. So I held her hand and I actually went to her group. And we went to her group. These two guys were busy backslapping each other. But now they are all right, Bharat-san. So I told her it is. But Bharat-san, I promised you yesterday they were going to kill each other. Now, the thing is, this cultural understanding of what works where. I mean, we are on workshops. I was at a workshop in Australia which had a nice British facilitator who at the end of the day asked for feedback. The Indians felt it was a great learning experience. The Britishers have three answers for everything: interesting, challenging, or isn't it? So it was interesting, a little challenging, and quite good, isn't it? So the Australian was very quiet. Now this poor Britisher made the mistake of prodding the Australian and said, but you haven't spoken, you haven't given me feedback. Now the Australians are, the Dutch and the Australians are the two most direct people you will get. So he looks at him and says, as far as I'm concerned, it was a waste of a day. More than him, my Indian colleagues didn't recover for 2 days for the guy saying this. So, I mean, it is, we are used to a certain humility. We're used to respecting authority. We're very, very hierarchical. I mean, I still remember I would have a little more senior fellows. If a brand manager from another country challenged them, they would come out and say, but how can he speak to me like this? I mean, there is a cultural element to everything. But having said that, I mean, if you look at the big picture, is the Made in India manager, is it a reality? Yes. Is it going to get more power? Yes. I mean, today, if you look at the percentage of Indian managers in multinationals, it is far greater than the percentage of India to their sales. I mean, this whole adaptability, we would advertise jobs for Africa or the less attractive companies of Asia. The only two nationalities that will apply will be Indians and South Africans. Indians will go everywhere and South Africans want to escape South Africa. That's it. So to my mind, I think it's a phenomena that is going to be bigger and hopefully better as we look along. And I echo his thought on the millennial. I think we like to pillory the millennial is far smarter than we were at their age.
Can I just add a little statistic to what Bharat said? When I joined Unilever, which was a long, long time ago, there were 3 Indian managers from Hindustan Lever who were expatriated. Of the 3, 2 went to Africa, and 1 was having a short 6-month training assignment in the UK. By the time people like Ranjan and Shiv came, there were about 80 managers, 100 managers abroad. Over the last 50 years, I'm counting 50, but really the operative years are about 30, over 2,000 Hindustan Lever managers have been abroad, come back, they moved on to other companies as CEO, etc. I'm taking Hindustan Lever as an example. I mean, he can tell you for Pepsi and other companies. The important point I want to make is, today I inquired back from my alma mater, Unilever, and there are Indian people running the following parts of Unilever: Russia, China, Indonesia, all of Asia, all of Middle East, Turkey, Central Europe. So I ask myself the question, that's not because Unilever loves them. Unilever thinks they are reasonably good. There is something happening out there, and that's the limited hypothesis. If we can, and that's happening in companies like Pepsi and McKinsey and so on, there is something good out there. If we can nurture this, it will be a good thing for this country. That's the limit.
Any anecdotes of cultural diversity like Bharat came up with?
So, right through the companies I've worked in, one thing that almost everyone recognizes is that Indians are extremely bright. That's a common...
Extremely?
Bright. That's a common comment everybody says. You guys are well-read, extremely bright. We have a point of view on many of the world developments, at least managers at a very senior level. That's one comment. A lot of other countries tend to be a little more isolated. So that's feedback again. I had an Australian boss, a chap called Colin Giles, a wonderful guy. So he used to handle lots of Indians from Finland to Australia to Africa. So
Nokia.
Yeah, in Nokia. So he said two things once to me, again in India when he was on a visit. He said, Shiv, in my 2-3 years of handling Indians, I've never heard an Indian tell me I need help. I need help. He said, I've never heard an Indian say that. So either they're supremely confident, they're damn good, they don't need any help from me. The other point he made was, in any Indian team management meeting, if he threw a challenge, the whole team would gang up against him. So he says there's no nobody disagrees with the boss, or nobody disagrees with the team view. Now, for right or wrong, they hold the team view right through the discussion. Whatever I challenge, the whole team pushes me back. So he says, I don't see other people saying, maybe there's a merit in your argument. So those are two cultural things one of the bosses.
Because in India, we tend to argue, disagree endlessly.
So,
amongst ourselves, I remember there is a value in the craft, this thing which is now in Mondelez, which is called discuss, decide, deliver. And there was this senior manager who came from the US 2 days. He says, clearly in India, the value seems to be discuss, discuss, and discuss. We're outstanding at that until somebody pushes us to a decision.
So the argument and hierarchy piece, I would argue, is going to change. I will give you my personal example. I think I first argued with my father, a serious argument, at the age of 19 or 20. And it was a decision to argue with my father. My father became my friend at 29. And I think largely we from a generation where our parents said that if you don't do reasonably well academically, I'm not sure that I have enough money to sustain 3 generations. That has changed. Secondly, let's take it one generation forward. I asked my son to sit down and he says, why? So I think our children have been parented far less hierarchically than we were. We have become friends to our children at a younger age. When these children enter the workplace, they will be far less hierarchical, far more willing to question. Of course, there's another challenge, whether our generation of managers is ready for less hierarchical entry. But therefore, the hierarchical weakness is going to actually go down. Also, when I first went abroad and had an audience of 50 foreigners in front of me, there is that moment of self-doubt because you've not experienced it before. Typically, our kids today have already gone on exchanges. They've had foreign students with them. They've sat in classes with them. Traveling abroad is far more common. Awareness is far more common. So it's a different dynamic. We cannot judge tomorrow's children. When we make career plans, I often feel that we are looking at the future through the rear view mirror. That's not the best way to do it.
Sure. I have a question related to this command and control kind of thing that we are, as a culture in India, used to. Now, there was a time when, India used to have expat managers managing India operations. Then we changed to Indians being hired for leading Indian companies. And now it's changed. Most country heads are just admin or licensed jobs, and most organizations are vertical with dotted reporting here and there. So does that put managers on the back foot? Because you are used to a certain mindset of command and control while managing things, but in a vertical organization structure with dotted reporting here and there, that no longer works, or does it?
I can give examples of having lived through 2 kinds of organization where all functions reporting, including the manufacturing to supply chain reporting at one point of time, and suddenly everybody reporting to different functional leads, either in UK or in US. What I personally believe is that I think it's time for people to recognize that's the way the world is going to work. This whole hierarchical way of running the company that everybody need to report, it's a completely a different skill set of how do you walk in the matrix organization, walk around the matrix organization to make things work. I think the accountability, the fact that my CEO taken the accountability, irrespective of whether people reporting or not, I can tell you people start, whether you like it or not, without you telling them, people start following instructions. You don't need people to report to you directly. I've had this experience of, you need to remember the fact in today's context, where the DOJ is asking the American CEO, do you know what's happening in China? If you don't know, in fact, it happened in one of the instances where the senator asked the global CEO, are you saying you don't know what's happening in India and China? They said, no, we are a decentralized organization. He says, this is the last time you're going to tell me that, you better get to know what's happening. And you won't believe now every company is so worried about wanting to know what's happening in the respective countries, whether China, India, Indonesia. So they pulled the entire supply chain reporting directly to them, compliance, HR, everybody reporting. Now, this is not going to change. So you're going to have a scenario where the CEOs have to figure out how to make things happen for the company, owning up the organization, irrespective of whether somebody is reporting or not. I've had a fantastic experience of having transitioned into an organization where many of them started reporting even without me telling them. So I'm of the opinion, this is the new skill set. If people are hanging on to the old paradigm, I don't think they're going to succeed. They won't get a job to start with.
Yeah, I'd say, I think the matrix organization for multinationals is here to stay. Okay, and there are very tangible reasons for that. If you look at the last 20 years, every service function is now a global function. You can get the best lawyers across the globe for you. You can get the best market research companies, the best advertising companies, the best legal firms. So the agglomeration of having the best across the world is far cheaper than having multiple people across the thing. Okay, so that's a given. I don't think they'll go. Now, how each MNC determines the way a matrix works depends on the CEO and how the senior management works. And I've seen the pendulum swing both ways. A few years it goes everything centralized, then they realize it's failed, then they go decentralized, maybe partially, etc. So this is a fad which every MNC goes through. Okay? I can't think of a single MNC which has not gone through this in the last 10 years. Procter's gone through this, Unilever's gone through this, Pepsi has gone through this, you name it, everybody's gone through this. There is no correct way of working in a matrix, number one. Second is, now all these guys reporting elsewhere creates a lot of problem. Okay, in some nationalities, people want to be very clear, whom do I report to, who is my solid line boss? Dotted line is a thing which less than half the countries understand in the world. Okay, Americans understand it, okay, but everybody wants what solid line is. Now, because information is so quickly available, I can tell you, like in PepsiCo, at 5 in the morning, you could get a ping saying, hey, this is the article on PepsiCo, did we respond to it? Because they would wake up, or their time at 9 o'clock would be 4 o'clock when the newspapers are released on the net here. You wouldn't have woken up at 6 o'clock. Okay. Now, MNCs are extremely worried about reputation. Anything which goes against that is the holy grail. Okay, because that really affects everything up and down the line. For managers, what are the implications? Number one, influencing. I cannot tell you how important it is to influence. Because the center of excellence guy might be 10 levels below you, but he has a chance to stop that project. You have to influence continuously. The second which I found is that you have to shoot for the common good. You have to find what is the common good in the way you're working. If you don't do those things, two things in my experience, then the country head or whoever you call him, chairman or whatever it is, then he will truly not be successful.
See, I agree with where they're going, but I have a different dimension. I actually believe, and having spent a lot of my time in the multinational, I actually believe that most, and I can only speak for consumer goods, so I don't speak for the consumer good multinationals have a serious problem. They don't know how to grow. None of them are growing over the last 5 years. Each of them, I mean, I came from the food industry. In the last 3 years, 97% of the growth has come out of small artisanal companies. Only 3% of the total growth of the food industry has come out of large multinationals. When you are not growing and you're a CEO which has Wall Street to report to, at best, if not a quarter, at least a half, then every 2 years, all you do is reorganization. Reorganization is a nice, polite way of saying you cut jobs. So therefore, when you have to cut jobs, you first said UP, Bihar, Jharkhand all had their own area managers. Then you say all three have one area manager. Then you say India has one manager. Then you say India, Pakistan, Burma, and Thailand have one manager until you keep going. And then until you realize all that is still not helping and you're still not growing, by which time the CEO goes and the new guy comes and starts all over again. So when I left Cadbury, I was a full service MD. Everything reported to me. 2 months, they went to a regional structure, then they went to a global structure. 2 months back, I meet the MD and he says, do you know, now everybody reports to me all over again. So I really think more, there is the cultural piece and there is also a lot of change where the smaller regional, Asian, even Latin Americans, local companies today are far smarter, far more dynamic, and far greater risk-taking. I mean, their investable surpluses, they are happy to invest in growth. A lot of the multinationals, the investable surpluses are not there.
Would you agree, I mean, just to add to Bharat's points, would you agree that in a matrix organization, the ownership level is lower than in,
I fully agree with what Bharat said. If you look at the history of multinational companies and you look at which countries they did very well, you will find that the local CEO was a true entrepreneur. He had a long stint and he took the calls, right or wrong. Right. He failed and he succeeded.
Right.
Okay. Procter worked brilliantly in China for a period of decade when they had Didier running their business. The moment he left and they started doing these changes every 2-3 years, they collapsed. Right. Okay. So empowering the local manager has been the strength of the multinational of the past. Now I worry, and this is my wife's expression, she says multinationals have become huge bureaucracies. Okay, and managing the bureaucracy actually drains some of your energy, which is not good. So everybody wants to follow process. I'm sure that these guys are running a big organization. No CEO ever says, I don't want to follow process. But he says, empower me to ensure that the process and my ideas both come to the table. That is when a CEO wins. No CEO wins just by following process. That's operation successful, patient dead. That's what happens when you follow just process without empowerment.
Sure, we're running out of time. So just one last quick question. One trait, one Indian trait that managers should leverage and one trait that you should unlearn or put behind.
I think the trait that I think they should leverage is continued adaptability. And the one that they should avoid is this inability to listen. These two are related. They're heads and tails of the same coin. But that's bad.
So, inclusion at a deep level and the ability to deal with contradictions. It was not unusual to sing Christian hymns in the morning and pray to the goddess Durga in the evening and compete for a seat on the bus. So, inclusion and diversity, a deep kind of strength of the Indian. The big one to me that we need to avoid is this tendency to take shortcuts. And in fact, I'm not sure whether the word jugaad has done more harm than good. So we need to recognize when we need to create systems rather than short-term fixes, and the ability to separate competitive context from collaborative context is what we need to learn better.
By the way, I must point out that all of us had multinational experience, and I hope you've demonstrated the benefits of listening to each other.
We're on time, I think.
I would say the one to leverage clearly is, we have this remarkable ability. You throw an Indian up in the air, he lands on his feet. I think that is really worth leveraging because, many years ago I had a problem in China. I sent 2 Indian fellows. In 2 years they were speaking Mandarin and they had solved the problem. The one that we should avoid on a lighter note, we should avoid this. The Indian nod, nobody ever knows whether we are saying yes, no, or maybe. On a more serious note, I think the one thing that we should really avoid is, I see a lot, there is a lot more of Virat Kohli creeping into the young Indian manager. This arrogance of, listen, I know it, do you know who I am? I think that's something to watch out for.
I think one thing every Indian should leverage is intellectual curiosity and very innovative mindset. I think Indians have the phenomenal ability to think multidimensionally. I think that's a terrific quality too. The one probably one need to take a look at is process-oriented thinking need to come into the way in which we do things. I think in India, one of the things that I always look at is people make fun of people who publish, become a PhD. They think PhD is for getting a job rather than you publish or perish, right? That's a way. So the whole concept of publishing, whole concept of process-oriented thinking, if we can adopt, we could be world beaters.
So I would say curiosity. Indians are innately curious, especially people at the top that I've seen. I think they should build on that. The second one I would say is creativity, which is where I think we can do a lot better. We get bogged down by rational arguments and we don't take the leap. And that's something that Indian managers can do a lot more of.
Sure. Thank you so much. We probably can take a couple of questions from the audience. Are there any comments or questions?
There are no other questions, so I'll just take the opportunity of having so many CEOs who work with food companies, international companies. As a farmer, my question to the people who worked in the food sector, because lots of your resumes say you have been in the sector in one form or the other, is financialization, international financialization of the commodity sector a threat to Indian small companies and Indian farmers, small farmer livelihoods? Because the way larger companies are growing, is their success a risk for Indian small industry and Indian farmers? Is scale a threat to smaller companies?
I frankly don't think so. I just think, especially in the context of food, Ajay, food is such a personal thing that finally, whether it's the local halwai around the corner, whether it's your favorite rediwala down the road, or whether it's your favorite restaurant, and the same extent, so yes, there is a cycle of food, local food companies becoming larger, getting acquired, but newer fellows keep coming up. And as I just pointed out, all of the growth actually today is coming from small fellows. Shiv will tell you, 20 years back, Lay's had a 90% share of potato chips. Today they have a 30% share. And all of the balance has been taken up by local guys. So I frankly don't think that's the problem. I actually think as we go more towards organized food, actually the farmer must benefit. I mean, in my Cadbury days, one of the things we were happiest with was we actually invested in bringing cocoa to India. In Kerala, the cocoa tree is still called the Cadbury tree because we bought the tree to India, taught farmers how to grow it, and we would collect all of the produce of the tree. So to my mind, I think over a larger period of time, I'm not worried as an Indian.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know, Mr. Gopalakrishnan would know this. I think 1995 or 6, there was the FIDA report, sir. McKinsey FIDA report, FIDA. Two things of the 5 I will quote. They said, number 1, the winners in food in India will be local. When they said local, people who understand local nuances and tastes, whoever understands it better. Second, they said, money will be made or lost in the supply chain in food, which is the point which Bharat was also making. So I don't think that, Indian companies in food will be at any disadvantage compared to anybody else outside of India.
Thank you, gentlemen. Is there anybody else?
Yeah, hi. My query is on the decision-making and risk-taking abilities of Indian managers working for multinational companies. As a firm, we do a lot of cross-border transactions, and we are always worried when the decision-making comes to the Indian manager taking a decision on a, inorganic growth opportunity. And typically, we see that the managers sort of are either insecure or, shy away from taking important decisions on behalf of the multinational. And I want to throw this question to the panel about your thoughts on the same, and what is it that causes this insecurity or the the delay? Is it the fear or the, that my decision can get wrong? It's almost as if that, they are sort of paid to not take risk and, be stable in their jobs. So your thoughts, please, the panelists.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I thought it would be the reverse. In my experience, I think Indian managers take many risks. At least I know from my example that sometimes our parent company thinks, is it really worth going after it? I would say the Indian managers, I'm talking about the people who run companies, are pretty good in decision making. I don't think I would ever say they are risk averse. It's just that our Indian environment is such, there is a lot of variables are there. So to that extent, to convince your top management to get some investments in India, it takes a hell of a lot of work and heavy lifting you need to do. But from a point of view of risk appetite, I think many Indian leaders are pretty good in that. I don't have a doubt about that.
I'll give you my blunt take on that. I actually think, frankly, as multinationals have got more matrixed, frankly, it's not about Indian managers. Multinational managers, nobody is rewarded for taking a decision quickly. But if he takes the wrong decision quickly or slowly, he's hung upside down. So therefore, to my mind, the issue really is the speed of decision making. It doesn't matter what manager it is. In a lot of times, multinationals, we are spending so much time doing these famous racy matrices that who's responsible, who's accountable, who has to be consulted, who has to be informed. In that whole process, therefore, decision making is by definitionally very slow. And therefore, when you compete against a multinational, you know that this is the minimum amount of time they will do to do anything.
So, I just think that when you make a country level conclusion based on behavior in a single organization, I would suspect that organizational culture, organizational incentives, and local considerations affecting the manager are what one should look at. Because in many of these contexts, organizational culture and incentives trumps nationality effects. So maybe the conclusion is a little premature because if you went to 10 different companies, you would get 10 different conclusions on this. So look at the local conditions. And what are you doing on recruitment? What are you doing on environment? Who's mentoring those managers? Look at those factors and see whether there's something that's controllable there. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much.